Imagine this, you're 443 feet underwater, trapped in the darkest, coldest depths of an icy, claustrophobic cave. You're not just diving, you're fighting for your life. For 5 Finnish divers, what started as a routine deep-water cave dive quickly became their worst nightmare. Only 3 would survive, but the tragedy that unfolded deep beneath the surface would change everything. This is the story of 5 divers trapped in an unforgiving labyrinth, where only 3 would make it back alive. It was February 6, 2014 in Rana, Norway, when 5 men, Kai Kenkinen, Patrik Grönqvist, Jari Huotarinen, Vesa Rantanen, and Jari Yu, set out to accomplish a dangerous and ambitious cave dive. This wasn't their first attempt at Plura Cave, which connects to the Steinuglafloget dry cave. Last autumn, Kai and Patrik had already discovered a connection between these 2 entrances, even completing a traverse, a daunting journey from one entrance to the other, something no one had done before. Their success in that earlier dive gave them a false sense of confidence. This time, they would start from the other entrance. With their experience and the skills they'd built over the years, they thought they could conquer the deep and treacherous passageways again. The cave system stretches for miles, submerging them in freezing waters, and with some sections plunging deeper than 426 feet, 130 meters, this was not just a dive but an extreme test of survival. As they drove through snowy Finland, Sweden, and Norway, they reviewed their plan over and over, hoping to avoid the slightest mistake. The whole dive would take 5 hours, if everything went as planned. When they arrived at Jordbro Farm, just outside the Plura cave, they rested briefly. But even in the freezing cold of 3 degrees C, they knew the next day would be critical. The journey to the cave entrance meant diving under the frozen Plura lake. As the team split into 2 groups, Patrik stayed behind with a chainsaw to cut a triangular hole through the thick ice, while the others went ahead to transport the equipment. After several hours, the hole was finally cut, and Patrik and Jari Huotarinen dove first. The water was unnaturally clear, and despite the harsh conditions, the team was optimistic. As they began their dive, everything felt right. Little did they know, they were about to face a nightmare no one could have anticipated. The Plura cave was infamous for its narrow, winding passages and extreme depths, and the team's skill would be pushed to its limits. Their dive would technically be classified as technical diving, requiring not only expert skill, but specialized equipment. Each diver was wearing a closed-circuit rebreather, CCR, that allowed them to stay submerged much longer by recycling exhaled air and preventing gas bubbles from disturbing the water. This wasn't just high risk, it was high stakes. A malfunctioning rebreather could lead to hypercapnia, oxygen poisoning, or worse, a slow, painful death from suffocation. Yet they pressed on, trusting their gear and each other. As they descended, the water's pressure increased, and their visibility decreased, making it difficult to discern any threatening changes in their surroundings. At 34 meters, the passage opened up for about 500 meters, sloping gently. But after that, the cave turned treacherous. The water pressure began to take its toll on the divers as they moved deeper, navigating through narrow squeezes that forced them to rely on their hands to propel themselves forward. As they ventured into the cave's heart, the pressure mounted, and their systems began to strain. They reached a depth of over 130 feet, 40 meters, and with the tight passages and diminishing light, they switched off their scooters. For a moment, the divers could appreciate the eerie beauty of the cave's depths. A haunting silence filled the air. But something was wrong. A sudden panic took hold when Patrik saw that Huotarinen, just behind him, was no longer where he should have been. The diver's light, once steady, was now wavering. Something was terribly wrong. Patrik was frozen. He could see Huotarinen, but the way his light was shaking meant distress. Without hesitation, he turned around to investigate, his heart racing. As he approached, Huotarinen demanded he remove one of his bailout cylinders blocking his path. What should have been a simple fix escalated quickly. Huotarinen's scooter cord was stuck, but that wasn't what was causing his panic. Patrik couldn't figure it out. And then it happened. Huotarinen's frantic breathing grew worse. Patrik knew that a panicked diver at this depth was a ticking time bomb. But then the unthinkable occurred. With Huotarinen gasping for air, Patrick tried to give him his spare regulator. But Huotarinen, in his state of confusion, inhaled the freezing cave water. The effect was immediate. The water's pressure and cold overwhelmed him. Patrick knew then that his friend was gone. But the path was blocked, and there was nothing he could do. Time was running out. Patrick needed to ascend, but the path was blocked, and he couldn't afford to linger. Every minute at that depth increased his risk of decompression sickness. His computer told him he needed over 7 hours of decompression time. But how could he survive? Patrick made the painful decision to leave his friend behind. He began his ascent with a heavy heart, knowing that survival came first, but the odds were against him. As the others started their dive, they would unknowingly head into the same fate. Meanwhile, Kai, Vesa, and Jari Yu began their own descent. The dive seemed uneventful at first, but as they neared the deepest section, Vesa became entangled. It wasn't long before they discovered Huotarinen's body, blocking the only path forward. What followed was a frantic, tragic attempt to navigate through the cave. Jari Yu, in a panic, switched between bailout gas and his regular regulator in a desperate, confused state. Despite Kai's efforts to calm him down, Jari Yu spiraled further, his fear and confusion overwhelming his training. Within moments, Jari Yu passed away. Now, with 2 friends lost, Kai made the heartbreaking decision to leave Vesa behind and attempt to make it out alive. His odds were slim, but he had no choice. Using only a little oxygen and with his rebreather system malfunctioning, he started his dangerous ascent. The cold was unbearable, and without his scooter, it took longer than he anticipated. As he ascended, his body screamed for air. Every breath was more difficult than the last. His diving computer showed he was far off track for a safe ascent. Without oxygen, without enough decompression time, Kai was risking it all. But against all odds, he pressed on, hoping for a miracle. When Kai surfaced, it was pitch black. But after what seemed like an eternity, he found the hole, only to realize there was no sign of his friends. For a moment, Kai thought he was alone. His journey had been a desperate one, and now it felt like he had failed. Back at the farm, Patrick and Vesa had made it back, still shaken by what had happened. But there was still no sign of Kai. The fear that he had succumbed to the same fate gripped them. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that they noticed the van light on. And there, in the van, they found Kai. The tragedy captured the attention of the diving world. But for Kai, Vesa, and Patrick, it was about honoring the memories of the 2 lost men. In the spring, Patrick and his team returned to the cave to retrieve their friends' bodies. Kai, too anxious to dive, stayed on the surface as the surface manager. The operation was grueling, but with careful preparation, they brought Huotarinen and Jari Yu back home. That's the tragic and inspiring story of 5 divers who pushed the limits of human endurance. In the end, it was their skill, courage, and unwavering bond that allowed 3 to make it back. But it serves as a chilling reminder. Even the most well-prepared divers are not immune to the dangers lurking in the depths.
If you were in their place, would you have left your friends to die in the water? Comment below and share your thoughts.
Stay safe and dive responsibly.